Hi everyone, I am Julia Kelly, the historical fiction author. I am back in London in my home, and it is the end of the month, the last Friday in the month, so that means I am doing a live Facebook event where I'm going to be talking to you guys a little bit about some behind the scenes stuff. I'm also going to be doing a Q&A, and then very exciting, I've actually got not one but two books for giveaway. So the first is an advanced reader copy of my book that will be out in January, The Last Garden in England, and the second is a hardcover copy of The Whispers of War. This book is going to paperback very soon, so I have some hardcovers sitting around. I thought it'd be a really nice idea to go ahead and give you guys some of those as well. So I'm going to wait for a moment here while people come on to the Facebook Live, so I won't start with that yet. But if you want to do me a favor and go ahead and drop a comment in this Facebook Live, not only will that get you a entry into this book giveaway, but it'd also be really great to hear from you and also hear about where everybody is coming to this Facebook Live from. So go ahead and let me know where you're watching from, and we're gonna go ahead and get started in just a moment. So I'm gonna vamp here for a moment while we let some people come on. Yeah, it should be good. I'm looking forward to this one. I think this is going to be a really fun Facebook Live. And unlike some of the problems that I had during the last one where I couldn't see comments, I can actually see the comments now. So I'm going to be able to respond to you guys a little bit more quickly than I was last time, and hopefully we'll have a good discussion while we're doing that. I also should say it is blazingly hot here in London. It's 34 degrees Celsius, which is about 93 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm going to be a little extra, and I do have a fan here. I also have a full-on Beyonce fan that I just turned on right now. But when I do turn it on, it sounds like this, and my hair starts blowing. Arguably could be a good thing or a bad thing. So I'm going to see if I can survive without that, but you may see a lot of this going on because London is not built for 34-degree weather. It's just absolutely blazingly hot. So I think all of us are very much looking forward to tomorrow where this mini heat wave breaks. So hi Sharon from Minnesota. It's great to see you join, and Susan's here as well. So thank you guys so much for joining. I think we're going to go ahead and get started because this opening part is just going to be me chatting and jumping in with some answers to questions as they pop up. But to start out here, I wanted to tell you guys a little bit about sort of some of my favorite books and also my origin story as a writer when it comes to writing historical fiction. So specifically, if you guys have been following me for a really long time, you'll know that I used to be a romance novelist. I wrote historical romance, so not a massive jump from historical romance to historical fiction in terms of having stories set in a different time, working with characters who have a different set of social expectations than we do. But there are a lot of differences, obviously, within the genre. And if you've read my book, The Whispers of War, you'll know while there is a very light romance in it, the focus is not the romance itself. So got to change things up a little bit, and I can talk also a little bit about why I wanted to shift over and write some different books. But first of all, hi Mary from Colombia, and Susan's from Bergen. Oh, I'm so excited! So many Americans in here, and we have some Canadians too. Welcome, Brenda. This is really exciting to see where you guys are all coming from. Samantha, hi from Florida as well. I'm guessing that it's pretty sad listening to me complain about how hot it is here in London when you're in Florida. But so I wanted to go ahead and get started here talking a little bit about why I switched over to the historical fiction genre and what brought me over, because I think with a lot of authors, it's very true that they started as readers, and they really enjoyed reading as a child, whatever it is that got them into it. And I think for a lot of us, it's family who are readers as well. So be careful if you have kids who read, you might be raising a writer, which is not such a bad thing. But for me, I've always read widely, and I've always read across a bunch of different genres. But I have always had a love affair with historical fiction in particular. And I've gone through ups and downs where I've watched a lot of it, and I've watched some, or I've read a lot of it, and I've I've had some times where I haven't read nearly as much for whatever reason. I was in a mystery mode or something like that, and so for me it really it comes in waves, or it used to come in waves, because not a big surprise, a lot of what I read right now is historical fiction. If you guys hear trucks going by, this is also some of the glamour of being an author doing a live during a heat wave. All my windows are open, and normally my street's pretty quiet, but I think we're getting a lot of deliveries right now. So I fell back into the most recent round of reading historical fiction that really has not let up since then. When I moved to the UK in 2017, I used to be a journalist, and when I sort of realized very quickly that my job was changing and things were changing at my company, I decided to make the move to the UK to be close to my family. My sister and her husband, then fiance, and my parents were all in the UK, and so I thought it was the perfect time to go and do the same thing. I'm lucky I have citizenship, so I was able to pretty easily make that choice. And then I got here and I thought, what am I going to do with myself? I was a journalist. I was also writing all of these books, and I had a bunch of books under contract, so I was working on those historical romances. If you've read my Matchmaker of Edinburgh series, that's what I was writing during that time and getting those books ready for publication. But I also suddenly was in this position where I was job hunting, and I was given the luxury of a massive amount of time. So I cooked a lot, I job hunted a lot, I wrote a lot, and I walked the dogs, and that's about all I was doing, while I sort of reset and recalibrated after having been a journalist, which is a really, really intensive job, and I did it for 9 years straight, sort of with no break in New York City, which is one of the biggest media markets in the world. So I was in this refresh, and I picked up, on my mother and father's recommendation, a series called The Cazalet Chronicles by Elizabeth Jane Howard. And these are these wonderfully rich books. There are 4 of them in a book she wrote as a sort of sequel to the series, many years later, and it's set about, if I remember correctly, 10, 15 years later. So I think for me, I just got absolutely captivated by this series because it's set when this family of children are relatively young, and it's in the 1930s, so you know that the war is coming. You know that's going to happen, and these books chronicle these kids getting older, their parents' kind of marriages coming together or breaking apart, and then also they talk a lot about how the war actually affects this family, and it goes through, the family itself goes through this huge change. So I read those books. They are incredibly detailed. They're impressive. I don't know that anybody who somebody who didn't live in that era, I don't know if it'd be possible to replicate the level of detail and understanding that Elizabeth Jane Howard was able to bring to that story, just for the tiniest little details, things that would take me forever to research. She was just absolutely incredible with how much she was able to put into those books. So I read those books, absolutely loved them, and was actually able to finish the series, which is unusual for me. I'm not a great series finisher. It's a character flaw, according to certain people I love very dearly in my life. I tend to binge on books, and I will, go through things really quickly, and then I'll kind of fall off. So for me, finishing this series, it meant I was really, really committed, really into it. And I remember walking around a bookstore with my parents at that time, who I was living with as I figured my life out here in the UK. And my mother picked up this honking great book that I actually have sitting on the shelf over there. And if I'd been smart, I would have grabbed it to show you guys. But it's this, big paperback. And I looked at the paperback, and it had this picture of these kids on a beach, and it was called The Shell Seekers by Rosamund Pilcher. And she said, I think you're going to really love this book. I think this is for you. And I started to read it, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. There's something so charming about Rosamund Pilcher's books. She is kind of unlike anybody else writing right now. She would write, in some cases, like this book and Coming Home and the Winter Solstice, she would write these sweeping sagas, but they were very personal, very intimate sagas. So you'd follow somebody very closely, or you'd follow a family very closely, and it wasn't like there was some people being, sent off to war and things like that in the Shell Seekers, but really it was actually pretty domestic and kept things pretty close to home. And really what it was about was this woman and her relationships through her life, and then looking back at the end of her life on what's going on right now in her family, and it features some of the worst children in literature. Well, one of the worst children in literature, and he gets a bit of a redemption in September. I'm not entirely sure it's earned, but I did enjoy that as well. So I read this book and I absolutely fell in love with it. And I thought, you know what, I want to write something like this. I want space where I can just kind of tell these stories. And I love romance, but I also want to tell some other stories that I'm not going to be able to really focus on if I write romance, where you really have to have the main focus of the story be on the couple and the development of a relationship. So I started noodling around with a pitch while I was supposed to be writing these other books. And I went out to my agent and I said, look, I've been thinking about writing historical women's fiction. What would you think about that? And she said, remember how we had a conversation about this about 6 years ago? And so I kind of woke up to the fact that maybe what I write and how I write might be a good fit for this genre. I went to New York and I went for my best friend's wedding. And before I went up to Cape Cod for her wedding, I was in New York, and so I had lunch with my then editor Marla and my agent. And these lunches tend to be more of like a catch up, and we already know each other, but more of a getting to know you type of thing than anything else. But at the end of lunch, when everything was cleared away, I don't think any of us were going to order dessert, but Marla just went, we are ordering dessert. And I kind of went, okay. And she said, I have to tell you something. And I thought, either this is very good or this is very bad. This is either going to be them saying, we don't want to work with you anymore, or it's going to be them saying, here's something exciting that's happening. And it was the something exciting that's happening. What happened was she basically said, look, we want you to write historical fiction. We really think you would be great in British historical fiction. How do you feel about writing World War II? And I looked at my agent and we just burst out laughing, because after I recovered from my shock, I explained that, I had literally just written a pitch and sent it to my agent that was really focused around World War II and focused around stories of sort of women that we don't necessarily hear all that often. And so that book is not The Light Over London. But the book that I pitched after she said, I don't think this is quite right, but you're on the right track, that's The Light Over London. So I wrote The Light Over London because, I would argue, Rosamund Pilcher's The Shell Seekers was such a big influence on me, and I really saw something that I loved about that book. So I'm really excited to see, a couple of you have said, Janet and Kathy, both of you have said you love The Shell Seekers. I do as well. Samantha, I'm really excited, and I would love to hear what you think of it if you do end up reading it. So I'm so glad it's on your TBR list. So yeah, that's sort of my origin story as a historical fiction author, with roots in historical romance, and then just kind of opening up and doing something a little bit different. So I've absolutely loved writing the genre. I'm so happy here because I get to tell these really different stories, really interesting stories, just because I have them next to me. The Whispers of War, if you haven't read it, it's about three women, one of whom is a German expat living in London at the start of the war. War is declared, and she becomes designated as an enemy alien. And suddenly there's a question of, what is going to happen to her? Is internment going to be brought up again? Because German people were interned during World War I, and so there's this sort of creeping threat that's happening, while also all these friends are working through various things in their life. One of them is, ambitious at work, but finding that because she's a woman, she's being blocked and forced to support her boss and be pretty brilliant at it, but she's not getting the recognition that she wants. She's not being allowed to be creative. There's another one who's a matchmaker who is having trouble at home on her own, and her marriage is in a place where she really has to decide what it is she wants, and all of that's really grounded in historical fiction with that, so I get to explore a bunch of really interesting stuff there. And then when it comes to, I know none of you guys have read this yet because very few people have read this, because it's literally hot off the presses. I got these copies this week. This is an advanced reader copy for the Last Garden in England, and this is what I'll be giving away this is what I'll be giving away today to somebody who's commenting in the comments, as well as this hardcover, The Whispers of War. But this is a book that's completely different from the Whispers of War. It's 3 timelines because I like to raise the difficulty on myself. It is about the designer of an incredible historical garden in 1907 and her story, and sort of how things changed for her when she came to this amazing garden. It's the story of what happens when the house that the garden is attached to is requisitioned in World War II, and the 3 women who are sort of at the center of that world, and how they have to get through the war, and how they have to do, you know, extraordinary things that nobody would expect them to be asked to be done, because they're not necessarily fighting in the war, but they're all contributing in their own way. And then it's about the girl in present day, she's a woman, the woman in present day who is trying to go ahead and restore this historic garden that's just been absolutely neglected. She's trying to figure out why anybody would just essentially, you know, lock the gate and throw away the key and not look at this garden, not have anything to do with it. And so that mystery starts to unspool through the other narratives, and it's just, this was an absolute blast to write. I always say The Light Over London, very fast to write, really loved it. It really seemed to flow immediately. This was my hard book. It was really tough, but it was really, really worth it. It was a great book to write. In some ways, because I learned a huge amount, I really ended up digging in and just absolutely loving this story. I'm so proud of what I wrote here, but it was a tough one. It was a high bar. It was tough. And this one was, you know, while not easy, because no book is really ever easy, this was just an absolute joy to write. And in another one of these Facebook Lives, I'll go into some more details about this book and about, you know, why it's certainly, you know, particularly personal to me, but I think, you know, for me, a lot of it has to do with the fact that this is centered around a garden, it's centered around a historic house, and it's, again, really digging into those women's stories back here on the home front. So that's a little preview of those books, and you can, again, win one of these books if you are commenting, which I know a lot of you guys are, and I'll get to those comments here in a moment, and asking questions. I'm going to be doing giveaway and drawing. Because this video is going to stay live or is going to stay up and repeat, I'm going to give people a couple of days to come in and comment, because I know a few people were saying this is a tough time for them because it's the middle of the working day in the US. It's 7 o'clock here in the UK, so at the end of my working day, it's great. But when it comes to diving into a Facebook Live, it's not always possible. So I want to make sure that people get a chance to go ahead and get some entries in. So don't be afraid and don't be shy to leave plenty of comments. So I have already got a bunch of questions, so I figure I'm gonna, you know, dive right in here. And I also have some ones that people left on my Facebook wall and on my event page beforehand as well. So when you do see these Facebook Lives, which are regular things that I've started doing the last Friday of the month, you're going to be able to grab some time and just write a little comment, and that will go ahead and enter you in for drawings and things like that as well. So I'm going to back the comments up here because you guys are great and just talking a lot, which is so exciting. Because we were just talking about the Last Garden in England, I do want to answer Sharon's comment, which is, it's such a beautiful cover. Did you get to pick it? And I think also somebody else mentioned Mary Beth in a previous post asked if I was involved in designing this. So kind of same questions. I don't have a thing to do with this cover. I can claim absolutely no credit for it. How it typically works with most authors is you don't get a huge amount of say when it comes to designing the cover. And I'll tell you what, I'm actually okay with that because I'm not a cover designer. I'm not a graphic artist, and any artistic talent I have is solidly on the writing side of things. I can also knit, but it's solidly on the writing things. It's not anything visual arts wise. I have an Uncle Nick and he got all of that talent, so it's not me. Instead, what ends up happening is I fill in essentially it's not even a form, it's really I send an email saying, this is what the book's about, these are the characters in the book. If I have any visuals in mind, if I have a Pinterest board, anything like that, I can send that along. And I have done that in the past to sort of give a sense of the mood of the book, give a sense of what I'm trying to convey. And for this one, I had a very strong idea of I want an abandoned garden. I want a sense that it's overgrown and that time has forgotten it. And this was even before we even came to the title of The Last Garden in England. I knew that I just wanted to make sure that that was really what was being conveyed, because the garden is so important to this book and so central to what's happening. So I think it worked out really nicely. I absolutely love it. I think it may be my favorite of all my covers, which I feel a bit like I'm cheating on my books by claiming a favorite or something like that. But I absolutely love this one, and I think it's just gorgeous. So I can't wait for people to read it and people to get their hands on it. This is, again, just an advanced reader copy, which means it's an uncorrected proof. So it doesn't have the full wrap treatment and everything, but knowing my publisher, they do beautiful, beautiful treatments of my books. The Whispers of War is all embossed. The hardcover for The Light Over London had this beautiful pearlescence on it. So it's really a treat to open up those boxes of books that come right around Christmas for me and unpack 50 author copies, which is crazy. It's a lot of hardcovers. And if I turned you around, in fact, you may be able to see back there, I don't know if it's coming through clearly, but you'll see a lot of the same color spine, and that's because those are author copies. So that's where I'm pulling from when I do giveaways, and if you ever see me at a signing and I have books to sell, that's really where they're coming from. So yeah, so thank you for the questions about the cover, and thank you for all the lovely comments. I'm sure that I'll be passing those along to the cover designer, who really is incredibly talented. So I'm going to snap my fan open. It's very, very warm in here, so I feel a little bit like a Victorian diva here. Okay, let me think. We will go through a couple questions here. Oh, Janet, you're in Arizona, 115 degrees. I'm so sorry. I hope you have air conditioning. I don't have air conditioning, and I'm dying here. So I hope you're more comfortable than I am at the moment. Oh, Anne, great question. Anne asks what inspired you to write this book. I'm guessing that that's The Last Garden in England, because we were just talking about that. So I have always had this idea kicking around for years in my head that I wanted to write a book all centered around a historical garden in different time periods, and I wanted it to be woman-centric, and I just didn't know what I wanted to write, and so it just was sort of kicking around for a long time. I think the inspiration really comes from the fact that my dad is a really talented gardener, and we just sort of always had gardens at the center of my life when I was a kid. We went on a couple of vacations where we came to England and did a lot of touring around. We saw my family and then did a lot of touring around the UK, looking at really beautiful gardens, and I just love it. I love flowers. I love nature. It's just something that just is an interest, and I think when you're writing a book, you want to write about something you're interested in, because you live with that book for at least a year, and then you take some time, away when you're done, and then when the book comes out, you're going to have to talk about it and promote it. So I knew I wanted to write about something I really loved and cared about, and one of my big hopes when I came over here to the UK was that I was going to be able to buy a home that had a garden. I've never had a garden of my own before, so I think I got to bring some fantasies out into this garden and design my garden that I would have loved to have. And I do have sketches of the garden that I made in order to guide me while I was writing this book, because spatially there was just a lot going on. It's set around a series of garden rooms. And so if you move from room to room, each one has a different theme. And so, yeah, I got to the point where I thought, I really want to do something with this idea. But ironically, I had pitched a whole bunch of other things for my next book, and I was talking with my agent, Emily, and Emily and I were chatting, and we had kind of this 45-minute long chat where she was like, I'm just not feeling any of these pitches. I don't think they're quite right. And I'm kind of going, I don't think she's right, but this is a bit frustrating. And at the end of the call, I just happened to be like, you know what? I'd really like to write one day is this book about a garden. And she went, tell me more. And I said, I'd love to write about a historical garden and just kind of get a sense of all these timelines weaving in. I don't know what the mystery would be. I don't know what the scandal would be. I don't know who these characters are, but I see it all happening around a garden. And she went, figure that out. We're going to pitch that. That's a winning pitch. And she was right. So the moral of the story is sometimes your agents are very correct. If there are any fellow writers on here. So that's where The Last Garden in England comes from. Susan, what were my favorite books as a child? That's a really good question. I read a lot as a child. I was a Nancy Drew reader. I read, fairy tales. I read pretty much anything I could get my hands on. I was a bit of a precocious reader. So I think I read Pride and Prejudice in 5th grade, and I can guarantee I remember understanding absolutely nothing. But I think I felt like it was like important for me to have read that book. Obviously, I've gone back since then and read it again many times and do love it. But I think for me, I really gravitated towards books with young women, books with coming-of-age stories. I know I was a little older. I was in maybe just before college, or maybe my first year of college, when I read I Capture the Castle by Dottie Smith. But that book was hugely influential on me, and it opens... I'm terrible at remembering quotes, but hopefully I can get this one right. It opens with the line, I write this sitting in the kitchen sink, or sitting with my feet in the kitchen sink, and now that I'm on the spot, I won't remember that. But it's about this young woman who is sort of going through a transitional period in her life. She is kind of going from being a child to a young woman, and some young American men or Canadian men move to the big house that I believe owns the rundown, very romantic castle that her family lives in. And so they're their landlords, and they get to know each other, and she has a very beautiful older sister, Rose, who gets involved with one of the other young men in the family. And it's just this moment of her having her world shift from being a child to being a young woman, and that profoundly affected me, and I thought it was just wonderful. And I also loved the film when it came out, so that was a big one. I just read a ton of stuff, and I have to say, I have a bunch of friends who have young daughters, and I'm very, very excited to dig out some of my old favorites and be the auntie who sends their kids books, and hopefully put some positive influence and make some young readers. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Susan and Anne both ask about what I'm currently reading, what's on my reading list. I'm currently reading, and I want to make sure I get this title right, The Kew Gardens Girls by Posey Lovell. I believe it's actually already come out here in the UK. I'm actually blurbing it for, which is giving a quotation about it, for her American publisher, and it's just fabulous so far. So I feel very comfortable talking about the fact that I'm probably going to say very nice things about this book. I actually met her. She writes under another name as well, and I met her in March, just before the pandemic sort of shut everything down. And she's absolutely lovely. I didn't connect the fact that Posey and her other name is Carrie were the same person, but was absolutely delighted to find that out. So sometimes it turns out to be a very small world in the author world. I'm also always researching when I'm writing a book. So at the moment I'm writing, I can tell you this. Okay, this is a secret. Don't tell my agent that I've told you this yet. So The Last Garden in England is my 2021 release, so it's coming up in January, which seems a really long way away for you, and it seems so close for me, because I've known about this book and I've been writing this book since 2019. Because you work pretty far in advance in publishing, I actually already know what I'm going to be writing for 2022, and I know that I'm also going to be writing for 2023, and my 2022 book, I can't talk too much about it, but it does take place in the late 50s here in the UK, so I'm doing a bunch of research about the late 50s to give me a bit of cultural context and to make the book a bit richer. So I think when you're an author, often you'll do research about very specific things to make sure that you get your facts right. And then one of the things I like to do also is make sure that I've got some sort of context for how things are happening. So for instance, in The Last Garden in England, there is a significant event of World War II that happens during the course of this book. And I felt like if I didn't acknowledge it, and it was such a big deal, if I didn't make it a part of the story, I was really going to be missing something. So I wanted to make sure that I was working that into the book. And so for this book that's going to be set in the late 50s, that I'm not supposed to be talking about, I want to make sure that I'm getting a sense of the culture, because even though I'm leaving World War II a little bit, and even though it's not that much time between the two things, 1958 in the UK looked very, very different from 1944, 1941, 1939, which are all the times that I've written about before. So I'm kind of doing my grounding research and making sure that I'm going to be solid on that. So that's what my TBR is looking like right now. Hi, Carolyn. I'm so jealous that it's rainy in Wales. I'm so jealous. You have a question about, is there a particular time of day or place that I write? Or with deadlines, does that not permit you from having that privilege? So that's a great question. It is true that things are a little different in deadline time than they are in regular, just kind of average everyday writing. So right now I'm aiming to write about 1,000 words, just over 1,000 words a day on the weekdays. And so I typically will start writing around, depending on if I'm being good or not, I'll start writing around 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening. When I'm on deadline, I will write on the weekends as well, quite a lot on the weekends, especially if I'm doing an editing pass, because I find it easier to kind of get a good solid amount of time with a book. So I'll do that as well, and that word count, depending on how desperate I am to get a book turned in, that word count could vary pretty dramatically. I know I have a few months that I'm working with here for this book, so I'm trying to give myself a bit of a breather, a bit of a break, because it's been an intensive spring, obviously for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that I had a bunch of deadlines during the height of the pandemic, and it's sort of, the work doesn't stop. And so I'm trying to make sure that I'm being healthy and giving myself time and not burning out, because the last thing I want to do is disappoint you guys by missing a deadline and not being able to get a book out, and it would disappoint me too. So I'm an old crusty journalist who believes in deadlines and loves them and knows that sometimes life doesn't allow that, but when I can help, I'm going to try to make that happen. So it's sort of, that's what my writing schedule looks like, but occasionally there will be a book that throws that off. So The Light Over London, that book wanted to be written at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I can't tell you why. I can't tell you how that ended up happening, but I would wake up at sort of 5:30, and I'd make a cup of tea and sit at my kitchen table and I'd write the book. And I got a huge amount done, and I was admittedly starting a new job at the time, so I think that had a lot to do with it. I needed the mental energy at the beginning of the day before I was exhausted from all the change that was happening in my day job, with just having a new job and learning the ropes. So I felt like it was the best thing for me to do. When I was writing The Whispers of War and starting out, I tried to replicate that because it worked so well for The Light Over London. It just wasn't possible. It's almost laughable that I tried. So for the most part, I'm really an evening writer. Stephanie, yes, I will be signing the copies that I'm giving away, no problem at all, and I do personalize those when I send them out to people, so no problem. Janet's asking about how I find time to read for pleasure. I sort of am constantly reading, so I read in the bath, which is nice. I can't bring a laptop to the bath, so that's one of the ways that I can get a break. I also do a lot of audiobooks. Right now I'm on a bit of a break from running, but when I was running, I would do a lot of audiobooks too, and so I'd listen that way. And again, if I'm trying to protect my weekends, I'll read quite a bit on the weekends as well. So I managed to squeeze it in here, no problem. Let's see. Ooh, I'm glad we have some period piece fans here. This is great. Wonderful. Okay. So, Mark, who's my brother-in-law, and has very nicely asked a question because he always is very supportive, and I suspect is probably watching right now too. Mark has asked what my favorite place was while I was visiting. Well, I visited while I was researching The Last Garden in England. So he's asked that question. I'm going to tell you a story. So, Mark is the one person, one of three people outside of the publishing industry who've actually read The Last Garden in England, because it hasn't gone out to advanced readers yet. So those are people who are bloggers and reviewers, and also I have a review crew, which I open some slots to. You can sign up on my website if you're interested in that. My website's juliakellywrites.com. And so I gave Mark a copy of the book to read, and I got a very, very angry string of texts that told me that I had made him feel emotions. So I was very proud of that, and he was joking around that I tugged on his heartstrings, which is not something that usually happens for him when he's reading. So I was very proud of that. So, Mark, because I've called you out publicly, I will be happy to answer your question about my favorite place that I visited. I really, really loved going to the place that actually appears in The Last Garden in England, which is called, let me make sure I get this right. It's called Hidcote Manor and Gardens. So it would have been Hidcote when it was just known during the time period, but Hidcote was being designed at the same time that my character is designing a garden. So my character's named Venetia Smith. Venetia, in 1907, was designing the gardens at Highbury House, which is the house at the center of this book. Hidcote is set not very far. My book is set in Warwickshire. Hidcote is in Gloucestershire. I'm so sorry if I've messed that up. I think that's right. And my dad and one of my very good friends, Jen, and I went on a little research jaunt to Hidcote to just check it out. And because my dad had mentioned the fact that Hidcote had garden rooms, which was what I was planning on having for my book as well, I wanted to have different themes in different areas of the garden. And so there are walls of hedge or brick that separate the garden out from itself. So for instance, there is a lover's garden, and there's a bridal garden, there's a children's garden, and Hidcote has that. So we went on a very sunny bank holiday weekend in August last year, which is really, it's coming up. And I just thought it was an incredibly beautiful place. And I love it because it's one of those places that seems like it would be beautiful no matter what season you go. And they really have just put incredible thought and time into restoring and preserving parts of this garden. In particular, the red borders are what I based the Last Garden in England's Lover's Garden on, and it's just this rich, lush, deep red. It's worth Googling and looking and seeing for yourself. It's just incredibly beautiful. And so I wanted to integrate a little bit of that local kind of garden history into the book itself. So that was the favorite place that I went to visit. And then I also drew a lot of inspiration from my parents' garden. I've been taking a lot of Instagram stories and Instagram photos. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I just think it's absolutely lovely. I adore that garden that they have, and so a lot of my plants that show up in the book are plants from my parents' garden. I just stole whole swaths of borders and described them because I liked the visual of being able to describe what I was seeing. And again, I don't have a garden myself, so I'm trying to make sure that I'm being accurate with my descriptions. So thank you, Mark, for that question. I very much appreciate it. You are already getting a copy of the book, so you are not eligible to win one in a giveaway, but everybody else is. So let me see. What else have we got here? I think we'll maybe do one more, and then I think I wanted to answer a question that came up last time that I didn't really get to answer, and so I'm just going to run through a whole bunch of responses really quickly. So bear with me. But first, Stephanie asks, during the writing process, does it ever happen that you have to do more research to make sure it's all accurate? All the time. All the time. I think I have double researched and triple researched the same fact multiple times in order to make sure that I'm accurate. And there is a point where you think to yourself, I did get that right, right? And you kind of, for me at least, I always want to go back and confirm that I'm as accurate as possible. I'm not perfect. I tell a story about how in the end of The Whispers of War, I needed to locate, let me see if I can do this without spoilers. I needed to locate a munitions factory in a certain geographical area. And I just decided to pick a town in this area. I'd never been, but it satisfied a bunch of things I was looking for. I needed it to be on a lake. And so I just put it there. And a very, very kind reader reached out to me. And I won't reveal the reader's nationality because it will kind of give things away. But they very, very nicely said, I really love the book. I really love The Whispers of War. I wanted to ask in the epilogue, you know, where is that place that you mentioned? Because I only ask because, you know, there was a famous instance of in World War One, a horrible industrial accident, and the munitions factory blew up, and I just didn't know that there was a munitions factory there during World War Two, and I just thought, oh no, I've made a huge, huge mistake because I was at the end of the book and I genuinely didn't think that it would even be an issue. And so they were very kind about it. And I laughingly said, look, I'm really sorry about this. I made a mistake. I am so impressed that you were able to see that, and you were so kind about it. I really do appreciate it. It's just a bit of artistic license on my part, and that's kind of the tension between fiction and nonfiction, right? But I do remember messaging my family and just being like, you're never going to believe what I just found out. And that was just error on my part. So I think, you know, going through and researching is part of the process of writing a book. It's not as though you do all your research up front and then, you know, you can go ahead and wrap things up and then just write the book. It's a constantly ongoing process. And it's an ongoing process through the editing and also through copy editing too, because copy editors are really incredible and they will essentially act as fact checkers where they can and try to make sure that you're spot on. And there were a couple of things in all of my books where some of them quite minor, where a fact check or a copy editor fact checked something and they were absolutely right. I had messed a date up, I'd moved a timeline, something didn't work anymore, and so those are kind of important things that pop up sometimes in books. But yeah, it was a bit embarrassing accidentally excuse me, accidentally centering a munitions factory that didn't exist anymore in a town. So oops. That's it's one of those author moments that you laugh off because what are you going to do otherwise? And it's artistic license. So, okay, I'm very excited about this. I really quickly want to go ahead and answer a question that I got last time that I didn't get to talk about. Even though I've managed to talk for 45 minutes by myself about myself, which is awkward. My favorite thing is to talk about other people's books because, again, I started as a reader, absolutely love reading. I still read really actively, and I told you guys the story of that Rosamund Pilcher book and those Elizabeth Jane Howard books that got me into my recent stint of historical fiction reading. I'm still in that. It's now predominantly what I read, although I read a lot of mystery, romance, a lot of history, not a big surprise, and some literary fiction, and I'm going back to the classics right now as well and really been enjoying that. So, but I did want to answer the question of what are some authors that I really love within historical fiction and give some recommendations. So some of these are going to be a little bit more on the historical fiction side, some are going to be a little bit more on the romance side, because I love both, and I hope that, you know, if you're reading my books, you like a dash of romance as well. So I'm just going to go through a big list here, but one of my favorite authors, one of my favorite books that I've read is The Alice Network by Kate Quinn. That's a World War II and World War I and post World War II book set in the UK and France, and it's a split timeline. So it's two historical timelines that are working together. And I thought it was fabulous. It's all about female spies in World War I and how people underestimated these women and how tenacious they were and the incredible things that they were able to do to aid the British in during World War I and aid the French, and it's such fun. So and it's harrowing and it's dramatic and exciting, and I really love that book. So please do read it. I want to pay a special shout out to my friend Kristen Harmel, who this week hit the New York Times bestseller list with her brand new book, The Book of Lost Names. I haven't read this book yet. I've been saving it because I'm really excited about reading it. It popped up on my Kindle because I was so excited about reading it. I didn't want to wait for the shipping for a hardcover to come. So I bought it on Kindle, really excited about it. Kristen wrote The Winemaker's Wife, which was her release last year, which has a gorgeous cover. And I really loved that book. The Winemaker's Wife is all about basically the French resistance in Champagne, and sort of how the wineries and the winemakers got involved. And again, it's a dual timeline, so it goes into the story of a woman in present day, and sort of she is unpacking this family mystery to in order to get a bit of to figure out a mystery and also get some perspective on her own life and sort of restarting her life after a significant event. And I just thought it was fabulous. It's complicated. It's, Susan says The Book of Lost Names is amazing. Okay, I'm really excited. I really, really want to read this book. You can go back on my Facebook page and see an event that I did with Kristen where she talks about it. And I think through the entire thing, I'm just sitting there like, this sounds amazing and I want to read it right now. So I'm very pleased to hear that. But The Winemaker's Wife is fabulous. I love a little messiness in my historical fiction, so I don't want everybody to necessarily have her wrapped up in it, tied in a neat, tight little bow. Everybody gets a happily ever after, because I feel like, especially when you're writing about the war, especially when you're writing about what was happening to people, there was messiness and there was difficulty. And so I love the fact that I think she did something really interesting with the end of that book. I think it's really satisfying. I think, it gives you the ending that you need, but she resists the urge to give you a super, super neat, pat ending. And I just absolutely love that when I see that with books. And that is one of the reasons why I have a couple people, including a friend yesterday night, who asked me about certain characters and certain threads and why certain people didn't get together with each other and what happened to them and all those things. And to me, leaving that openness is a lot more realistic to everyday life than it is to than it really is to have everything in a neat, tight bow, because that's just not how life works. So I love seeing that in a book and think it's so interesting to see when authors decide to do that. So I also wanted to shout out Alyssa Cole's historical romance. So these are romance novels. An Extraordinary Union, which is the beginning of her Loyal League series, which is Civil War set romance, and then Let It Shine, which is a fabulous book, and it's a novella, so it's super fast if you just want to get a taste of what she is writing about. It's about the civil rights movement in the United States in the 1960s, and these two characters from very different backgrounds kind of coming together, and it's just beautifully done. And I think what she writes, and she's writing all sorts of stuff these days. She's done historical romance, she's done contemporary romance, she's done sci-fi, she has a book coming out that I'm gonna mess the name up, No One Was Watching, maybe something like that, but it's going to be her new release. It's a thriller. Really excited about that. So I think she's just super talented, and she's somebody I've been rooting for a long time, ever since we were baby authors together in New York City. So I I also wanted to talk about, let's see, I'm going to do this quickly. Brookly Foster's Summer Darlings. This is not UK set. It's set in Martha's Vineyard in the 1960s, sort of the JFK years, and everything is sort of seems to be in this very rich community, shiny and glossy, and everybody is privileged and everybody is extraordinary, and there are some very dark, very deep secrets that are going on in this community, and you see it through the eyes of a young woman who is up from maybe Vassar, one of the women's colleges, and she has a summer job being a nanny in this house, and she's lying, other people are lying, everybody's lying to each other, there's all sorts of things to unpick. It's intriguing, there's a bit of Hollywood glamour that gets thrown in there too, really a lot of fun, and the cover has a fabulous red bathing suit that I would love to own. So and then I also, another book that is coming out, and I was very lucky and got a chance to read it in advance. So this is Hazel Gaynor's book. It has one of two titles, depending on where you live. I think in North America, it's called When We Were Young and Brave. And in the UK and Ireland, it is The Bird in the Bamboo Cage. So I read the version that was The Bird in the Bamboo Cage. It is all about the young women at a Christian missionary school who are also a Girl Scouts troop in China when Japan invades, and they are taken into the internment camps, and they spend the war in increasingly difficult conditions, but they sort of show that the spirit of girls and the spirit of women is unbreakable, and the bravery of these teachers and these girls, it weaves back and forth between the teachers and the young girls. Their spirit is just absolutely incredible, and I think the most amazing part about it is that it is a true story, or it's inspired by a true story. Obviously there's fictionalization, but Hazel, I think, found out about this subject because of an NPR story, which I actually heard as well, and I remember thinking to myself, that would make a really great book. I hope somebody writes it. And somebody wrote it, and not only did somebody write it, somebody who I really admire wrote it, so that is always a nice thing to see. So I would absolutely love it if you guys would let me know what you're reading. Let me know if you've read any of these things. I know some of you have been popping up in the comments, and yeah, I think this is basically a chance to just please stack my TBR with really, really good historical fiction, because that's what I'm looking for right now, especially because I'm so heavily into research mode at the moment. I'd like to kind of take my head out of the research clouds for a little bit and get a bit of time to swim around in some other worlds as well. So I always look for recommendations. This video is wrapping up right now, but you can always go ahead and leave comments. I am hoping, last time it didn't do it, but I'm hoping that this video will stay around with its original comments with no problems this time. We had a little technical difficulties last time, so but keep commenting, keep letting me know what it is you're reading. If you're a later viewer, you are more than welcome. I'm going to have another one of these events. I'm going to pop up the event and drop it into the comments as well here really quickly, so you can RSVP for next month. We'll be talking about, obviously more questions and things like that. We're going to have a new theme. So I talked about kind of my historical fiction writing origins and a bunch of book recommendations. Next month we're going to talk about something different and kind of pull in some different things so you guys get a bit of a sense of what goes on behind the scenes. You can also request and let me know what it is that you'd like me to talk about. I'm always happy to pull the curtain back a little bit, and whether it's talking about research or inspirations for books or movies or whatever it is you guys want to ask me about. I get a lot of questions about being an expat also, so that is also always welcome. Please do leave me a comment and let me know. So, and if you guys will stick around over the next couple of days, I will be popping in and letting you know who is winning. It's going to be two separate giveaways. One is going to be a copy of The Last Garden in England. One is going to be a copy of The Whispers of War, hardcover, an advanced reader copy. So please do stick around. I will do a random drawing for both. and I will let the winner know by popping in and responding to a comment that they left. So please do let me know what you think about how these books sound. If you've got any books on your TBR list that you think should be on mine. I love talking about books. So thank you guys so much. Thank you very much for spending your time with me, whether it's your evening or your afternoon. And I hope we get to do this again sometime soon. Keep an eye out for the next link. Thanks, guys.